That
I didn't
wasn't a
think
part
about
of the
it.
dream, really?
I didn't care.
Really?
I really didn't. I didn't care. I mean,
Bernie Mac's story is one of pain, struggle, and laughter that carried him from the tough streets of Chicago all the way to Hollywood fame. He was born Bernard Jeffrey McCullough on October 5, 1957, on the south side of Chicago, one of the roughest areas in America at the time. His early life was filled with challenges. His father left the family when Bernie was young, and that meant it was just Bernie and his mother, Mary, trying to survive. Money was tight, food was often scarce, and moving from one small apartment to another became normal for them. Winters in Chicago were bitterly cold, and keeping the lights and heat on was always a struggle. But Mary taught Bernie something that would guide him his whole life: don't cry through the pain, fight it with strength. For Bernie, that strength came through comedy. While other kids might break down, Bernie used jokes as a shield. He learned that laughter was a way to survive in a world that felt unfair. He would make people laugh in school, at home, even at church. It wasn't just about being funny, it was about creating light in a place filled with shadows. But tragedy struck early in Bernie's life. When he was just 16, his mother, Mary, passed away after a battle with cancer. This broke his heart. He had leaned on her for love, protection, and guidance, and suddenly she was gone. Around that same time, he also lost his brother and later his estranged father. In only a few short years, Bernie lost nearly everyone close to him. Imagine being just a teenager and dealing with 3 devastating losses. He was left with a heavy weight of loneliness, but instead of letting it destroy him, he turned even more to comedy. He began to talk about pain, death, and dysfunction in ways most comedians would never touch. He told the truth about the hard parts of life, and people respected that honesty. During the late 1970s and early 1980s, Bernie's life was far from glamorous. He worked tough jobs to make ends meet: janitor, delivery truck driver, mover, and even bus driver. Some nights, when he didn't have enough money for rent, he slept in his car. But through all that, he never stopped telling jokes. He studied comedy legends like Richard Pryor, Red Fox, and even the Three Stooges, carefully shaping his own style. He started performing in small clubs across Chicago. These weren't fancy venues, they were loud, smoky, and often filled with tough crowds. But those rooms became his training ground. At the Cotton Club, one of his regular spots, Bernie learned how to handle hecklers, how to pause for effect, and how to keep a crowd under control. His humor was raw, fearless, and different. People noticed. A key part of Bernie's journey was his wife, Rhonda. They met when they were just teenagers, and Rhonda believed in him long before the rest of the world did. They married in 1977 when Bernie was only 19. While Bernie was hustling for $5 a night at comedy gigs, Rhonda worked multiple jobs to keep them afloat. She never told him to quit, never told him his dream was impossible. Instead, she pushed him forward even when the odds seemed impossible. When their daughter Janice was born, Bernie's purpose became stronger. He didn't just want to be funny anymore. He wanted to create a legacy for his family. Rhonda and Janice were his foundation, and Bernie always said he wouldn't have made it without them. After more than a decade of hard work, Bernie finally got his break in 1990 when he won the Miller Lite Comedy Search. That single victory opened new doors, and suddenly, people outside Chicago started to notice him. But it was in 1992 that his career exploded. On HBO's Def Comedy Jam, he walked on stage with the crowd already restless and rowdy. Most comedians would have been nervous, but Bernie stood firm. In a simple black t-shirt, he declared, "I ain't scared of you," and the room went wild. That 4-minute performance became legendary. It wasn't just comedy, it was confidence, power, and truth. From that moment, Bernie Mac wasn't just another struggling comic, he was a star on the rise. Following his success on Def Comedy Jam, Bernie began landing small roles in movies. His first was in Mo Money, 1992, playing a doorman. It wasn't much, but it gave him a taste of Hollywood. He kept picking up small roles in movies like Friday and Above the Rim, where he showed he could do more than just deliver jokes, he could act with depth and emotion. Slowly, his reputation grew. By 1996, he had joined the sitcom Moesha as Uncle Bernie. While it wasn't a lead role, it gave him steady work and allowed him to learn about television production. Those lessons would later help him run his own show. The late 1990s brought one of the most important chapters of his career, the original Kings of Comedy tour. Bernie joined forces with Steve Harvey, Cedric the Entertainer, and D.L. Hughley. Together, they created something bigger than a comedy show. It became a movement. The chemistry between the four comedians was unmatched. Each brought a different flavor, Steve Harvey with his church-like storytelling, Cedric with his smooth charm, DL with his sharp edge, and Bernie with his raw, fearless honesty. Crowds packed arenas, sometimes 20,000 people at a time. The tour sold nearly 1 million tickets and made over $36 million. Spike Lee captured the magic in a 2000 documentary, and suddenly Bernie Mac was not just a comedian, he was a household name. But not everything behind the scenes was smooth. Bernie and Steve Harvey clashed often. Their egos collided, and tension built between them. Bernie later accused Steve of trying to steal roles from him, including his part in Ocean's 11. While Steve denied it, the damage was done. Their friendship never fully healed, and when Bernie passed away, many fans felt that feud had never found closure. Despite these challenges, Bernie kept climbing. In 2001, he pitched an idea to Fox for a sitcom based on his life. The Bernie Mac Show premiered later that year, and it was unlike anything else on TV. Bernie played himself, a man suddenly raising his sister's 3 kids. What made the show stand out was his unique storytelling style. He often broke the fourth wall, talking directly to the audience about his frustrations and lessons. It felt personal, like Bernie was sitting in your living room. The show was raw, funny, and full of heart. Critics loved it, and it earned Bernie 2 Emmy nominations, a Peabody Award, and other honors. For many fans, this show was what made Bernie unforgettable. Outside of TV, Bernie's movie career blossomed. He starred in the original Kings of Comedy film, then landed a role in Ocean's 11 alongside George Clooney and Brad Pitt. More roles followed in Charlie's Angels, Full Throttle, Mr. 3000, and Guess Who with Ashton Kutcher. Each role showed his versatility. He could be funny, serious, or heartfelt, and audiences loved him in every setting. But behind the success, Bernie was fighting a private battle. Since the early 1980s, he had lived with sarcoidosis, a rare disease that affects the lungs. At first, he kept it quiet, not wanting sympathy. He worked through the pain, even when breathing became difficult. In 2005, he publicly announced he was in remission, but the truth was that the disease never truly left him. Rhonda and his daughter saw the reality: oxygen tanks, fatigue, and nights when he could barely move. Still, Bernie pushed forward, working on movies and television, determined to give everything he could. In 2007, Bernie shocked fans by announcing he was retiring from stand-up. He said he was tired and wanted to focus on other things. Many thought he was just ready for a break, but in reality, his body was warning him. Years of pushing through sarcoidosis had weakened his immune system. He was fighting harder than anyone realized. By 2008, Bernie's health was rapidly declining. On July 24th of that year, he was rushed to Northwestern Memorial Hospital in Chicago with a high fever and difficulty breathing. He was placed in intensive care and connected to a ventilator. For 17 days, he fought for his life as his family stood by his side. Rhonda, his wife of over 30 years, never left him. She whispered to him, prayed with him, and held his hand. At times, Bernie opened his eyes, giving his loved ones hope. But the infections in his lungs worsened, and his weakened body couldn't recover. On August 9, 2008, Bernie Mac passed away at the age of 50. The official cause was complications from pneumonia, but those close to him knew sarcoidosis had weakened him for decades. The world was stunned. Just days earlier, fans had been told he was stable, and now he was gone. The loss was deeply felt across the entertainment industry. At his memorial service in Chicago, more than 6,000 people gathered to say goodbye. Friends and colleagues like Samuel L. Jackson, Chris Rock, Cedric the Entertainer, Steve Harvey, and many others paid tribute. Jesse Jackson spoke, and letters from Barack Obama, Oprah Winfrey, and Brad Pitt were read aloud. It was clear Bernie Mac had touched countless lives. His humor, his honesty, and his courage had left a mark on the world. After his passing, his family carried on his legacy. His wife Rhonda became president and CEO of the Bernie Mac Foundation, dedicated to raising awareness and funds for sarcoidosis research. She turned her grief into action, pushing lawmakers and scientists to give more attention to the disease that had taken her husband. In Illinois, April was declared Sarcoidosis Awareness Month, thanks in part to her efforts. The foundation has since raised hundreds of thousands of dollars, hosting fundraisers, awareness events, and partnerships with medical organizations. Rhonda's strength kept Bernie's fight alive. His daughter Janice also worked to carry on her father's memory. For a time, she served as vice president of the foundation. Later, she launched her own projects, including a podcast called Bernie's Daughter. On it, she shared stories about her father, what it was like growing up in his shadow, and the challenges of building her own identity. She opened up about her grief, her struggles, and her healing process. For fans, it was another way to connect with the man they loved so much. Even years after his death, Bernie Mac's influence remains strong. His comedy still inspires new generations of comedians. His honesty, talking about pain, family, and real struggles, set him apart from others. He showed that laughter isn't just about jokes, it's about truth. His show paved the way for other TV series to use storytelling styles that break the fourth wall. His stand-up routines remain legendary. And his fight against illness showed incredible resilience. Bernie Mac lived only 50 years, but in that time, he built a legacy that will last for decades. He started as a boy from Chicago who used laughter to survive. He rose to become one of the greatest comedians of his generation. He faced pain, loss, and sickness, but he never stopped bringing joy to others. 17 years after his passing, his family's voice reminds us that Bernie was more than a comedian, he was a husband, a father, and a fighter. His story teaches us that even when life is unfair, laughter can be a shield, and truth can be a weapon. Bernie once said, "I ain't scared of you." Those words became his trademark, but they were more than just a punchline. They were a reflection of how he lived his life. He wasn't scared of failure, wasn't scared of pain, and wasn't scared of telling the truth. In the end, Bernie Mac showed us that real strength is not in hiding your struggles but in facing them with courage. And that's why, even today, we remember him, not just for the laughs he gave us, but for the heart he shared with the world. There are some people in this world who are born to make others laugh, not just because they are funny, but because laughter is the only medicine they know how to give. Bernie Mac was one of those rare souls. His life was not an easy one. It was full of pain, loss, and struggle, yet he turned all of that into something beautiful, comedy that spoke to people's hearts. When Bernie stepped onto a stage, he wasn't just another comedian telling jokes, he was a man sharing his truth. His voice was loud, his words were raw, and his honesty was unforgettable. To the people who loved him, Bernie Mac was more than a celebrity, he was a fighter, a father, a husband, and a man who lived with courage until his very last breath. 17 years have passed since Bernie Mac left this world, but his story still feels alive. His wife, Rhonda, and his daughter, Janice, continue to share his legacy, reminding fans of the man behind the microphone and the television screen. For many, Bernie's death at just 50 years old was not only shocking, it was heartbreaking. Here was a man at the peak of his career, respected and admired, suddenly gone too soon. But to truly understand the impact of his death, you first need to understand the journey that brought him to fame, the battles he fought behind the spotlight, and the love he left behind. This is not just a story about a comedian. This is a story about survival, about taking the worst cards life can hand you and playing them anyway. Bernie grew up in a world that was tough and unforgiving, yet he refused to let that world define him. He buried more loved ones in his youth than most people do in a lifetime, but instead of falling apart, he rose stronger. His comedy wasn't about silly jokes, it was about real life. He talked about family, about being broke, about pain, and about the hard truths that most people were afraid to say out loud. That honesty is what made audiences love him. But behind the laughter, there was always another battle. Bernie suffered from sarcoidosis, a disease that attacked his lungs and made every breath a struggle. He kept much of that pain hidden, determined not to let sickness stop him. He worked through the exhaustion, the coughing, and the weakness, because to him, quitting was never an option. When he finally did slow down, it wasn't because he wanted to, it was because his body could no longer keep up with the weight of his illness. Bernie Mac's life was short, but it was powerful. It was filled with moments that showed the strength of the human spirit. His story is about how love, laughter, and truth can change not only a man's life but also the lives of millions of people who watched him. So let's go back to where it all began, the south side of Chicago, where a boy named Bernard Jeffrey McCullough would grow up to become Bernie Mac, a man the world would never forget. Some entertainers leave us with laughter that fades as soon as the stage lights dim. Others, though, give us something deeper, something that stays long after they are gone. Bernie Mac was one of those rare few. He wasn't just a comedian who made people laugh, he was a storyteller who gave people strength, who turned his own pain into humor so that others could forget theirs, even for a little while. His voice was commanding, his timing sharp, and his presence unforgettable. When Bernie said, "I ain't scared of you," it wasn't just a punchline, it was a declaration of who he was. A man who faced life's toughest battles head-on and dared anyone to doubt him. But Bernie's story isn't just about laughter. It is also about loss, sacrifice, and resilience. It's about a man who grew up with nothing but used humor as a weapon against poverty and despair. It's about a boy from Chicago who lost nearly everyone he loved before he was even grown, yet carried that pain in silence and transformed it into something powerful. His comedy wasn't polished or pretty, it was raw and real. That's what made people love him. Bernie didn't try to be perfect, he tried to be honest. Behind the laughs, though, was a man who knew suffering all too well. He battled an illness that most people had never heard of, sarcoidosis, a disease that attacks the body from the inside, making simple things like breathing feel like a war. For decades, Bernie fought through the exhaustion, the pain, and the weakness without showing the world how hard it really was. He kept smiling, kept working, and kept making people laugh because he believed in something bigger than himself. He believed his purpose was to bring joy, no matter what he was going through. 17 years after his passing, Bernie Mac's legacy is still alive. His family, his friends, and his fans remember him not just for the roles he played on screen, but for the man he was off it. A husband who leaned on the love of his wife Rhonda, a father who adored his daughter Janice, and a fighter who never stopped giving even when life tried to take everything from him. His journey from a small apartment in Chicago to some of the biggest stages and screens in the world is nothing short of inspiring. This is not just the story of a comedian. It's the story of a man who took hardship and turned it into history. It's about how he lived, how he loved, and how he fought. It's about the truth behind the laughter, the sacrifices behind the success, and the final days that revealed the strength of his spirit. To understand Bernie Mac, you have to go back to the very beginning, to the streets of Chicago where a young boy learned that the world could be cruel, but that laughter could be his shield. Some comedians come and go, but very few leave a mark so powerful that people still feel their presence years after they're gone. Bernie Mac was one of those rare legends. He wasn't just funny, he was real. His comedy came straight from his life, the struggles, the pain, the loss, and the survival. Every joke carried a piece of truth, and every laugh he gave the world was shaped by the hardships he faced growing up on the south side of Chicago. But Bernie's journey was more than just laughter on a stage. It was a fight against poverty, against heartbreak, and against a disease that slowly weakened his body even as his career soared. Through it all, he never stopped working, never stopped fighting, and never stopped bringing joy to millions of people who saw him as more than just a comedian. He was a husband, a father, and a fighter who gave everything he had until his final breath. To understand Bernie Mac's legacy, we have to go back to where it all began, the boy from Chicago who learned that laughter could be a weapon, a shield, and, ultimately, his gift to the world.